Welcome to the deep dive. We're going back in time to explore, UFOs.
Specifically, those fascinating early sightings, public
Exactly.
reaction, and how the government, particularly the FBI, handled those reports.
We have some incredible source material for this deep dive.
Yeah, declassified FBI documents.
From the 1940s.
Think field reports, memos going back and forth with the War Department.
It gives us a glimpse into those years when everyone was captivated by the idea of flying saucers.
Really takes you back.
It does. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, a lot of people think of Roswell
Right.
when they think about early UFOs, but that was later.
Oh,
We got to go back to the beginning, like the real genesis of that whole flying saucer craze.
Right.
July 1947,
Right.
Kenneth Arnold's report.
Arnold, he was a pilot, right?
Yeah, flying near Mount Rainier when he sees 9 unusual objects in the sky.
What did they look like?
His description of how they moved is what really caught everyone's attention. He said they moved like saucers skipping on water.
Ah, so that's where the term flying saucer comes from.
Exactly.
Huh, interesting.
But his report wasn't just about what they looked like.
Oh, so there was more to it.
He said they were moving incredibly fast.
Like how fast?
Arnold estimated about 1,200 miles per hour.
Wow. No way anything back then could go that fast.
Yeah, nothing known back then could do that.
So what do people think?
Well, it was kind of a mixed bag.
Huh.
Definitely excitement and curiosity, but also some fear.
I bet. It's like you read in the newspaper and bam, stories about these mysterious objects zipping around at impossible speeds.
Exactly. It sparked all sorts of speculation.
And I'm guessing the media had a field day with all this.
Oh, absolutely. Sensational headlines.
Oh, yeah.
Grainy photos of supposed flying saucers.
So the media was just amplifying that public interest, maybe even the anxiety around it all.
Probably, yeah.
It's funny how the media still shapes how we see UFOs today.
That's true.
So how did the FBI handle all these reports coming in?
Well, at first they were pretty skeptical.
Really?
The documents, they classified it all as miscellaneous.
Miscellaneous.
Yeah, and even considered it could be possible sabotage.
So they weren't buying into the whole alien spaceship idea right away.
Not at all. But
None.
they were getting pressure from the public, and the War Department was asking questions.
So they had to take it seriously.
Yeah, and they did.
What did their investigations look like back then? I mean, did they even have the technology to figure this stuff out?
Well, remember, this was the 1940s.
Oh, right, yeah.
The technology was limited compared to what we have now.
True.
They mostly interviewed witnesses, looked for any physical evidence, and sent everything to headquarters.
You know, I do remember reading about a powered soapstone.
Oh, that case.
Yeah, where they thought it was a piece of a crashed saucer.
Turns out, just a regular soapstone.
Wow, even back then people were jumping to conclusions.
Seems like it.
But even if the FBI was skeptical, they were still looking into it all.
Yeah, and their statements show that
How so?
they kept saying they'd fully investigate all future reports, but they never jumped to conclusions.
So cautious.
Very cautious.
Makes sense. Trying to balance public concern without saying anything definitive.
Exactly.
So investigating, but not necessarily believing.
That's a good way to put it.
What were some of the cases that really caught their attention?
Well, there was this case in Norfolk, Virginia, with a photo of a flying disc
Photo.
taken by a teenager. It even made the newspapers.
Oh, wait.
The FBI interviewed him.
Yeah.
He said he saw these objects moving way faster than any airplane he'd ever seen.
I bet they were getting reports from all over.
You're right, from all over. And each case just made it more complex.
More complex. How so?
Well, there was a report from Milwaukee, a disc-shaped object found on the fairgrounds.
What was so special about that one?
Witnesses said it had what looked like an electric motor and a propeller.
Really?
Yeah, not your typical flying saucer description.
That's strange.
It made them wonder if these sightings were all connected, or if there were different types of objects out there.
So we've got all these sightings, the media frenzy, and the FBI trying to figure it all out, but carefully.
That pretty much sums it up, yeah.
What's really interesting is that the FBI wasn't alone in all this.
You're right, they were talking to the War Department, sharing information about these sightings.
So even if the FBI was hesitant, the military was definitely interested.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you think the military was so interested? Were they worried or just curious about the technology?
Probably both. Remember, this was right at the start of the Cold War.
Oh, right.
Tensions were high, technology was advancing rapidly.
Good sense.
The idea that someone else, like an enemy, might have better aircraft would have been a big worry.
So the government's reaction to UFOs, it might have been more about managing fears than figuring out what they really were.
Exactly. And that fear, plus all the Cold War secrecy, could explain why they kept some of this from the public.
Hmm. Makes you think.
It does, but that's a conversation for another time. What's important now is understanding how complex this all was for the FBI.
They were dealing with something no one could explain.
Exactly, while also dealing with all the political and social anxieties of the time.
Sounds like we're just getting started.
We are. There's so much more to unpack, especially about the military's involvement.
We'll have to dive into that in part 2 of our deep dive.
We will, and in the next part, we'll look at specific cases, the challenges investigators faced back then.
And the mystery that still surrounds those early UFO sightings.
Absolutely.
Back again for the deep dive. Still digging into those declassified FBI documents from the 1940s, seeing how they tackled those early UFO reports.
Really shows you how tough it was to investigate the unknown back then.
Especially with the technology they had.
Right. Today, we've got advanced radar, high-resolution cameras, all these tools to analyze data.
That they didn't have back then.
Exactly. They had to rely on what people told them.
And imagine those witnesses were pretty shaken up.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine seeing something like that? You'd be excited, scared. Who knows what you'd even remember?
You mentioned the technology. How did that impact their investigations?
Well, let's say you're trying to figure out how fast something's moving in the sky, but you don't have good radar. Or you've got a blurry photo, but no fancy software to make it clearer.
Makes sense.
How do you even begin to verify anything? Or tell a real UFO from a weather balloon?
Must have been frustrating for them.
It was, and it made it easier for people to hoax them or misinterpret things.
Like that Powered Soapstone case.
Yeah, exactly. People saw what they wanted to see.
I bet there were some cases that really stumped them, though.
Oh, absolutely. The ones you just can't explain, no matter how hard you try.
Anything in the documents jump out at you?
That case from Milwaukee, the disc-shaped object they found at the fairgrounds.
We talked about that briefly before, right? What was so interesting about it?
Witnesses said it had things that didn't fit the usual flying saucer story.
Like what?
An electric motor and a propeller.
Really? That doesn't sound like something someone would just make up.
Right, like, how do you fake that?
What did the FBI do?
They investigated, of course, but like a lot of these cases, the trail just goes cold.
We don't know what they concluded?
Nope. Or even if they figured out what it was.
Just adds to the mystery, doesn't it?
It does. Shows you how powerful the unknown can be. We might have all this fancy technology now, but some things we just can't explain.
And those are the things that really get people thinking.
Exactly.
We talked about that Hackensack case, too. What happened there?
Oh, yeah, that one was interesting. Witnesses saw this disc-shaped thing just kind of slowly spinning in the air.
Like it was hovering.
Yeah, then it suddenly took off super fast.
Almost like it wanted them to see it, then decided to show off a little.
Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But the witnesses, they were sure it wasn't a kite or a balloon.
They saw something weird.
They did.
It's amazing how detailed those early reports were.
Shows you how much these sightings affected people. They weren't just quick glances. They had time to really see what was going on.
And the FBI relied on those accounts, didn't they?
They did. But we all know eyewitness testimony isn't perfect.
People can get things mixed up, especially if they're scared or excited.
Exactly.
How did the FBI account for that?
They'd interview witnesses multiple times, looking for any inconsistencies.
Trying to catch anyone lying?
Not necessarily lying, but, memories can change.
That's true.
They also looked for physical evidence, but that was hard to come by.
So they were skeptical, but still open to possibilities.
I think that's a fair assessment.
But they were working under some constraints too, right? Like the political climate back then.
Oh, for sure. Imagine if these UFOs were actually enemy aircraft.
That would be a big deal.
Huge. The government might not want to admit something like that. Could cause a panic.
So keeping things quiet, protecting national security.
That's the idea.
We know the War Department was involved too.
Right.
What were they doing about all this?
Yeah. The details are still pretty hazy.
We just don't know.
We know they were getting reports from the FBI, and it's safe to assume they were doing their own investigating.
Maybe even more secretive stuff.
Possibly, but we just don't know for sure.
Like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
That's a great way to put it. We have these glimpses into what the FBI was doing, but the bigger picture, especially with the military, it's still obscured.
And that's what keeps people coming back to this topic, isn't it?
It is all those unanswered questions, the speculation, the debate.
Makes you wonder if those missing pieces are out there somewhere.
I hope so, but even without them, I think there's a lesson to be learned from all this.
What's that?
That the truth, especially about the unknown, it's rarely easy to find. You need a critical eye, an open mind, and you got to be willing to question what you think you know.
And a lot of patience.
Oh, definitely.
We might never have all the answers,
That's true.
but that doesn't mean we should stop looking.
Right. Our curiosity, our desire to understand the universe, that's what keeps us going.
That's a great point. Well, we've reached the end of part 2 of our deep dive, but the story's not over yet.
Not even close.
In part 3, we'll look at how those early investigations shaped how we think about UFOs today.
Yeah, and what we can learn from them for the future.
Stick with us. Welcome back to the deep dive, wrapping up our look at those declassified FBI files on UFOs from the 1940s.
It's amazing how much we've uncovered.
Yeah, the public's reactions, the media frenzy, and how carefully the government approached those first sightings.
And we've seen hints of something bigger going on, too, especially with the military's interest in all of this.
Makes you wonder if these documents are just scratching the surface.
I think they are.
It makes you think about how these early investigations, even with their limits, shaped how we see UFOs even today.
That's a really interesting point.
It is, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you see the start of that cautious approach, relying on scientific evidence and being skeptical about anything too outlandish.
Right, like setting the standard for how we evaluate these reports even now.
But things were different back then, weren't they?
Very different.
The Cold War, fears about the Soviets, national security, probably playing a role in how everything was handled.
Exactly. That secrecy, that paranoia, it definitely had an impact.
It's possible they kept some things hidden, not just about aliens, but about, protecting national security.
Absolutely, it makes sense.
So the government's reaction to UFOs, it was as much about managing public perception and keeping secrets as it was about figuring out what these objects were.
I think you're right.
And that secrecy, it's kind of created this lasting skepticism, this mistrust that's still around today.
You see it everywhere.
It's like this legacy of secrecy that hangs over the whole UFO debate.
And it's something we need to be aware of as we keep digging into this topic.
We need to be critical of what the government says and those sensational claims you see and focus on the evidence.
And accept that there might be things about all this that we just don't get yet.
Like admitting we don't have all the answers.
Exactly.
Reminds us that finding the truth, especially about something like UFOs, it's rarely easy.
It's a process.
And that's where these old documents are so valuable.
They really are.
They show us this key moment in our history when we first started to think, hey, maybe we're not alone.
It's a story that's still unfolding.
And these early parts of it, they help us understand how complex the UFO phenomenon really is.
And how hard it is to separate fact from fiction.
The biggest lesson, I think, is that we need to be open-minded, think critically, and be okay with not knowing everything.
To embrace the unknown.
Even when it challenges everything we think we know.
That's the spirit.
It's about curiosity, skepticism, and respecting the evidence.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into these FBI files.
We've come a long way.
We have, and I hope it's left you with a sense of wonder and a new appreciation for the mystery of UFOs.
Me too.
Thanks so much for walking us through all this. It's been enlightening.
It's been a pleasure, and to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and never lose that sense of wonder.
The universe is full of mysteries.
And who knows what we'll discover next?